I do want to share just two thoughts on research. One, sort of my personal journey, and two, sort of the idea of what research is in the academic world and how broad it is. So, Michelle mentioned how undergraduate research was important in her career. It was really critical in mine in many ways. I have the advantage of a father who was a professor. So I went off to college and he said, you need to get into a lab and work with somebody. I kind of knew I might want to do physics, maybe math, maybe history. So I went my freshman year, boldly talked to my physics professor and said, I'd like to do work for you. And he said, great, we have no research right now, but we really need people to drive us to the airport. I said, fine, I'll do that. So my first research job was driving physicists from New Jersey up to the New York airports and back. And I was told in my interview, it was one of my first job interviews, you realize if you kill any of us, you probably won't graduate. I'm like, okay. That was another good safety tip. But I ended up, if you're familiar with physics, I ended up working for the experimental particle physics group. That's why I was driving people to the airport, because they fly mostly to the labs in CERN and Chicago. And what I learned is I absolutely hated particle physics. And I hated working in these large experimental groups. But I loved doing research in physics. And I learned a lot. And so when I went to grad school, I tried something else. And I do condensed matter physics, which is where you get to do your own work in your own lab. In addition to football and superheroes, I make most of my money in the lab studying bubbles and foams, another equally fun thing that my kids think is amazing, that their dad got paid to study bubbles. So, you don't know where you're going to land when you start this research journey. I've had over almost 50, if not more, undergrads work in my lab. Many of them do not do research the rest of their career, but they learn a lot about themselves, they learn a lot about what they love to do, and they learn a lot of really interesting skills, which is my segue quickly to the second point I wanted to make about research. And this is part of where I think our partners in the community can help us. One thing I've noticed is when we say the word research or undergrad research, they think of Michelle and myself, people who are in a science lab doing stuff with science. What's amazing about UCI and UROP is it's the entire campus. And we have research from undergrads in every field that doesn't necessarily meet the stereotype of what people think of as research. And I was thinking, well, how would I explain this? So you are my test case for the following attempt to explain the breadth of research, and then you can tell me whether this works or not, and I'll either get rid of it or use it again in the future. But I thought about a journey through length scales. At the absolute smallest scale of quarks and fundamental particles, you've got physics going on, and we're in a place in a world where we can ask questions we've never been able to ask before because we can measure things we've never been able to measure before. So part of research is measuring stuff, like just looking around and be able to know things. And then you move up to maybe the next scales, and somewhere in there is chemistry. We'll skip over that briefly just because I'm a physicist. But you're sort of to the sort of cellular biological level. And again, the theme continues of measuring and asking questions. What's interesting there is you're starting to cross over maybe with health and other things where, we're kind of in this interesting time where we might be able to make health very personal and individualized. People are walking around with watches making measurements about their health that a big machine couldn't have done, just 20 or 30 years ago. Right? And that's sort of an unprecedented chance to ask new questions. Again, this theme of asking questions. And then when you sort of get up to the interesting levels of individuals and individuals interacting with each other, and maybe our campus is a circle. Maybe we're moving away from physics, chemistry, engineering over to the social science, maybe the humanities circles. And there's so many amazing new questions of society that are coming in. It's an unprecedented moment of technology. I was at something yesterday where people pointed out, no one could have imagined making an iPhone, or that people would need an iPhone, 10 or 15 years ago, or whatever the number is now. Maybe it's 20. But now, people would feel like they would die without their iPhone or the equivalent. By the way, as an aside, I've pointed out, for those of you who are Matrix fans and love the movie The Matrix, we are already living in the Matrix. We are already the source of power and energy for all the electronic systems that have taken over the world, because I take very good care of my phone. I feed it, and I'm at its beck and call. It's just a wireless matrix. We're not physically plugged in. We're just living through our phone. But that raises major questions. How does technology change society? What should we be doing it? What could we do with it? What should we not do with it? And all those questions become research questions that our students are the ones who are going to ask and answer. And some of those questions are absolutely critical for issues of equity and justice and inclusion in ways that we've really not been willing to ask as a society, and we're now willing to ask in unprecedented ways. And there's also the element of research which is very much sort of in arts. As I move from humanities to arts, figuring out how to express these questions in new and exciting ways so that people can understand what we're asking, right? And then you start going to back up to the even higher level, and you really, the issues of economics, politics, and how we interact as a society. You can't deny that there is a lot of really interesting challenges facing societies. And an interesting one for me is as a scientist who loves science fiction, there's been this eternal promise that, technology and robots will make our life easier with less work. I don't know how many people are working less, but I certainly am not, right? But I've noticed that the technology idea of making life work less is clashing with the social idea of everybody needs to work, because if you don't work, I'm not going to give you money. Right? Our society is grounded on only if you're working should you get money. So if we create a world where you don't have to work, what the heck are we going to do? That's a big question. And it's a research question. And it's one that takes economics, politics, sociology, psychology to answer those questions. And basically, for those of you who care, how to get to the world of Star Trek, where we can all be happy and we don't have to work and we just do what's fun, and food comes out of a slot in the wall. So, and then you get to go to the even bigger scale and come back to physics. This is the thing that fascinates me of planets. We now have the technology to detect and study planets outside of the solar system in ways we've never had before. UCI is at the forefront of that in our involvement with some of the new largest telescopes. We are able to look farther back in time, look at the scale of the galaxy. I always find physics fun because it's the smallest and the largest scales. We can't do anything in between. That's just too hard. But this is research. It's every field. It's every question. And at its core, it's asking open-ended questions. And I'll just bring this back. This is why our students involved in research, I think, are some of the best students for going out and being employed in all sectors in the world. Because it's not about necessarily being trained to have a job as a researcher in a company. It's being trained to be the person who knows how to ask questions and solve problems that haven't been solved before, right? A lot of what happens in the university classrooms, it's important, but a lot of what happens is solving the things that already have an answer. That way we can grade whether you were right or wrong. I can only grade if you're right or wrong if I know the answer ahead of time too. Research is the open-ended questions. It's the space where you learn to deal with uncertainty. It's the space where you learn to deal with questions. It's the space where you learn to work with each other and seek out help for the areas where you don't know what to do. So figuring out how to get that message out so that when people hear of the Undergraduate Research Symposium, they realize it's super cool students asking really interesting questions to solve some of the world's most important problems. That's kind of a long phrase. I don't know if we can make it shorter, but that's kind of where this event is. It's our students showing that off. So I'm excited for the event every year. It's really exciting to be back in person this year after 2 years virtual. So thank you for braving the early session. And with that, hopefully I did not go too long, and I'll turn it over to Sharon.